So today I'll give you a brief introduction to events, and after that we'll discuss messages. If you remember, while I was giving you introduction to ABAP, I said ABAP is an event-driven programming language, right? So today we'll see what are those events, how the system behaves when you use these events in your program, and then we'll discuss messages, how to show different messages to the users. For example, let's say sp underscore matnar type matnar. Let's say I'm giving one input field on the selection screen to the user to input a material number. Based on that material number, I'm selecting the description and I'm finally writing that description in the output. So far you're writing your code this way. You're simply writing the code, open code. You're not using any events. So when you write your code this way, by default, the system actually is keeping all your code under one standard event, which we call the start of selection. Okay. So in this case, the code that you write will be executed in the order in which you write the code. So if I've written this select statement first, then this select statement will be executed first, and then it will execute the write statement, right? But if I keep my code this way, it will first execute the write statement and then it will execute the select statement. So it basically executes the code in the order in which you write your code, right? By using these events, you can actually divide your code into different events, and when that event takes place, the system will execute your code. So in that situation, the code will not be executed in the order in which you write the code. We simply associate our code to different events. These events are triggered by runtime environment. We have no control when they are triggered, but all we can do is we can maintain those events in the program, and whenever that event takes place, the system will execute the code that you have written under that event. Okay, so there are different events that you can use. There are reporting events, there are selection screen events, there are list events. So there are quite a few events. We'll be seeing all these events later in detail. We'll be going through all the possible events that you can use, and we'll try to understand when they are triggered. But for today, I'll just give you a basic introduction on how to maintain these events and how they are triggered, all these things. Okay, so to demonstrate that, let me ask you a question. Right now I have this parameters field. When I execute, it shows me this input field and it's empty right now, there's no value. What if I want to show a default value in this input field? What should I do for that? The moment I show the selection screen to the user, I want to show a default value in the selection screen. In this pmatnar field, I want to show one material number as a default value. Anyone can tell me what I should do for that? How do we show a default value? Karnakar?
We can use this statement.
Karnakar, your voice is very faint.
Are you able to hear now, Kiran?
Yeah, but it's pretty faint.
Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah, basically we can use this statement as default.
Default.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So if I say parameters pmatnar, type matnar, default, let's say I'll give this material number, then it shows that value as the default value. Right? So it's working. Now, let's say I have one more input field. P underscore date, type, side item. Now in this field, I want to show the current date as the default value. If I run this program today, it should show today's date as the default value. If I run it tomorrow, it should show tomorrow's date as the default value. Now in this case, how do you show the default value? So in this pdate field, I want to, whenever the user runs my program, I want to default this pdate to current date, today's date. So in this case, how can I show default? By using this default addition, you can show some static value as a default value. I cannot give a variable name there as a default value, right? So you cannot use default addition in this case if you want to show the current date as default value. Any other way you can think of how I can show this default date? Karnakar?
by giving in the variant, like we have a variant, we can give a different.
The user need to select the variant. Here, by the time I show the selection screen, like we are showing 100 as the default value, the same way pdate should be filled with current date.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but that requires user input. Okay, you choosing that particular variant.
Yeah. So how do we do this?
So can't we give the same as a default side item?
As I said, side data, you cannot give a variable here. It should be some static value if you say default.
Oh, okay.
So side item is a system field which has the current date. So you want to show that date as a default value. So how can we do it? What is this parameters keyword doing? It's creating a input field on the selection screen, and it is also defining a variable in your program, right, with the same name pmatnar, and this variable in your program is linked to this input field. So whatever you input on the screen in this pmatnar is stored in this pmatnar value. That means if I execute this, whatever I've entered in this pmatnar is stored in this variable pmatnar. Right? Both are linked. Now the same way, if I fill this pmatnar with some value, will this reflect on the selection screen? There is a possibility, right? What I'm trying to explain is, for example, if I say pdate equals to side item. So I've defined this pdate as a parameters, and if I fill that pdate with some value, will it reflect on the selection screen? Because if I input something on the selection screen, it's stored in this variable. The same way, if I store something in the variable, it should also reflect on the selection screen, right? So can I do it this way? Can I say pdate equals to side item?
Yep.
But still, it's not showing me anything. Why? The problem here is you can say pdate equals to SciDatum and the system will reflect it on the selection screen, but if I keep a breakpoint on this statement, pdate equals to SciDatum, and execute my program, it's showing me the selection screen, and after that when I click on execute, that is when it is actually executing this code. So after showing the selection screen, once I click on that execute button on the selection screen, that is when I'm updating pdate with the SciDatum. So that's why by the time the selection screen is shown to the user, it's not showing any value because this code is not executed before that. So what if we can execute this code pdate equal to SciDatum even before showing the selection screen? If I can execute this code before showing the selection screen to the user, then it will show this default date on the selection screen, right? So right now, since we are not using any events, you are simply writing this open code. So all the code is getting executed after showing the selection screen. So by using these events, you can actually divide your code in such a way that you can execute some code before showing the selection screen. You can execute some code after showing the selection screen. So depending on when you want to execute your code, you can maintain those events. So there are different events. For selection screen, there are different set of events. For your standard report, there are different set of events. For your list, when you're using write statement, it generates a list screen. So for that list screen, there are different set of events. Okay, so as I said, we'll see these events in detail, but how do we use these events? Okay, for example, there's an event called @SelectionScreen. So to use an event, all you need to do is simply use that event keyword. @SelectionScreen is one event. So if I want to use this event in my program, then I'll simply introduce that event by its event keyword. So if I say @SelectionScreen and write my code under it, then all this code will, whatever code I write after this event will be part of this event. Now line number 16, 17, 18 are part of this @SelectionScreen event. So this code gets executed when that event takes place. Okay, and this @SelectionScreen event is triggered after showing the selection screen. So this won't solve our purpose. For example, if I execute this now, I forgot to activate, so it's taking time. Ravi, you have a question?
Yeah, hi Kiran.
Yeah.
Will this code will behave same if you put the code above the parameters at the line number?
I'll be telling you. I'll be telling you that what happens when you put this code somewhere else.
Okay, fine.
So I'm using this event @SelectionScreen. That's one selection screen event. So if you do F1 on this @SelectionScreen, @SelectionScreen is a selection screen event, and there are different variations. So you have @SelectionScreen on output, @SelectionScreen on field, on block, on radio button, on help request, on value request. So there are quite a few variations to this @SelectionScreen event. So one of them is @SelectionScreen output. Okay. So now I'm using this @SelectionScreen event. When I execute this program, now even that code is not triggered before showing the selection screen. When I click on execute, it executes this code. So it triggers this @SelectionScreen event. Okay. Now I said one of the variations to your @SelectionScreen event is @SelectionScreen output. So if I say @SelectionScreen output, if I use this event @SelectionScreen output and write my code under that event, now let's see, when I execute, before showing the selection screen, it is executing my code. So it's stopping at this breakpoint. Now I'm defaulting the value, right? Now, since I kept all the code under at selection screen output, then all this code gets executed. It executes all the code and then it shows the selection screen. So since I could execute my code, pdate equals to side item before showing the selection screen, it is showing today's date as the default date. So anything you want to do, even before showing the selection screen to the user, you can use this at selection screen output event. So like that, for every purpose, there is one event. So all you need to do understand is what are the different events that you can use in your program and when they are triggered. If you can understand this much, then you can take advantage of those events. So if you get a requirement saying that, okay, show me this as a default value or disable these fields before I do something, and once I do something, enable them, then you know where you should write this code. So if you want to disable some fields on the selection screen by default, then you can write that code to disable the fields in at selection screen output, because that event is triggered before showing the selection screen. So anything that you want to do before showing the selection screen, you can use this event at selection screen output. But when I use this event, all the code that you write after that event will be part of that event. Now I've said write vmkTX, this select statement, so everything is executed before showing the selection screen. But ideally, I just want to execute this line before showing the selection screen, and the remaining code I want to execute after showing the selection screen. Right? So there's one more event, a standard event called start of selection. Okay. So if I use that event, now this code, whatever I write under this event, is part of start of selection now instead of at selection screen output. These events are introduced by event keyword, and the event ends when the next event starts. Okay, to end this event, all you need to do is start another event. So since I'm starting this another event, start of selection here, this at selection screen output event ends here. So only this pdate equals to side item, only this line number 16 belongs to this at selection screen output now, and line number 18 and 19 belong to start of selection event. Okay. Now whatever you write after that will be part of start of selection event. Now if you want to do something else, you just want to keep these two lines of code under start of selection and write some other code which you want to execute at a different point, then again you need to start one more event. For example, let's say end of selection. There's one more event, end of selection. And now start of selection ends here, and whatever code you write after this will be part of this end of selection event. So the basic concept about these events is events are introduced by event keywords, and they automatically end when the next event starts. You don't need to explicitly end an event. They implicitly end when the next event starts. Okay. For the time being, you can just understand these three events, four events: at selection screen output, at selection screen, start of selection. These three events are sufficient for you to understand. As I said, we'll be seeing all these events in detail later. I'll try to go through all the possible events that you can use, when they are triggered, and all these things. But the basic concept behind events is, by using these events, you can actually divide your code in such a way that you can decide when a certain code in your program gets executed. Okay. So now I said pdate equals to side item before in the set selection screen output. So this is getting executed before showing the selection screen, where I'm defaulting a value, and then it shows me the selection screen. Let me also keep a breakpoint here. So here it's executing this code, shows me the selection screen, and now when I execute, it is executing start of selection. So it executes the code under start of selection. So now if you see, if I keep this at selection screen output here, I'll say start of selection first and then at selection screen output. So it doesn't matter where you write your code. This event will trigger when that event takes place. Every time before showing the selection screen, it will execute the code under at selection screen output. It doesn't matter where in your program you maintain this event. You maintain it at the beginning or the end. So the order in which you write your code has no relevance now. Earlier, the program was executing the code, the order in which you write, but now it has no relevance. If you see this now, I said pdate equals to SciDatum as the last line in my program, but when I execute this program, that will be the first statement that gets executed in this context, right? So it executes this code, then it shows the selection screen, and when I click on execute, it executes the code under start of selection. Okay. So events are introduced with this event keyword and they end automatically when the next event starts, and it doesn't matter where you maintain this event in the program. You can maintain at the beginning, end, wherever you maintain, the system will execute that code when that event takes place. Okay. Now there's one more event called end of selection. For example, if I say start of selection, and here if I say end of selection, so now it will first execute this code, pdate equals SciDatum, then it will execute the code under start of selection, then after that it will execute the code under end of selection. Now if you see, it's executing start of selection, then it is going to end of selection. So by using this event, it really doesn't matter in which order you write the code. Only the code under the event will be executed in the order in which you write, but overall in the program, you can maintain this event at any place, and the code under that event will be executed when that event takes place. So if you look at other programs that we have developed, so in this program, if you see, we are not using any events, right? We are simply writing open code. We are not using any events. So the code was executing in the order in which you write the code. But actually, if you see, if you're not using any events, by default, the system has kept all the code under this start of selection event. So that's the standard event. So if you don't have any events in the program, then the system will keep all your code under this start of selection event. Or if you have any code which is not explicitly associated with any of the events, for example, if I write some code like p_matnar equals to 100 600, now to which event this code belongs? Line number 15. I did not associate this code to any of the events. I did not keep this under end of selection or start of selection or at selection screen output. So I have some code in my program which is not explicitly associated with any of the events in my program. So in that case, the system will attach that code to start of selection. So if you don't have any events in your program, or if you have any code that is not associated with any of the events, then the system will by default associate that code to start of selection and execute it when it executes start of selection. Okay, so start of selection is basically a standard event. So here, if you see, first it is executing this at selection screen output, the code under at selection screen output. Then it shows me the selection screen, and when I click on execute, it is executing this p_matnar. Now if you see, we are under start of selection event. This is the event that is being processed. So it has kept this pmatnr equals to 100, 600, that code under start of selection, execute start of selection, and then it is executing end of selection after start of selection. Okay. So at least if you got a fair idea about what are these events, that's fine. We'll discuss this. Events are one type of processing blocks actually. So when I talk about processing blocks, we'll go through all the possible events that you can use in ABAP and when they are triggered and in which programs you can use these events. So we'll see them in detail later. But for the timing, if you understand what are these events, how the system behaves when you use these events, and how to use these events, that's sufficient. Because when I explain you messages, I have to use certain events. Without using events, I won't be able to show you messages. So that's the reason I'm explaining you these events. Right? Any questions on these events? Vijita?
Yeah, Kiran. So what I understand is that event is occurrence of anything which will trigger some code which we've written in that block. So when we have start of selection and then end of selection, after start of selection it goes to end of selection. But nothing happened, right? I mean, what is end of selection exactly? Because there is no user interaction, nothing, what is the event which is triggering end of selection?
These are reporting events, start of selection, end of selection, initialization. These are reporting events. So initialization is if you want to do something at the beginning of your program, when the user executes your program, the first thing that you want to do, you can use this initialization. That's the first event that gets triggered. Okay. For example, you want to capture the execution time. Your program might take half an hour to execute, right? But you want to, the moment the program is executed, you want to capture the time at which the execution started. So you want to do that at the beginning of your program. So you can use this initialization event. So that's the event that is triggered first. And then all the general selection, you will be selecting data from different tables, right, based on the parameters. All that code we write under start of selection. So under start of selection, you maintain the code where you'll be selecting the data. And once the selection is over, you'll be printing the data in the output, right? So in that case, you say end of selection, that means the data selection is over, and then under end of selection, you write the code to print in the output. Okay. So this end of selection is useful if you're using logical databases. Otherwise, it really doesn't make any sense using end of selection in your program. But the actual purpose of this end of selection, you'll understand once you understand how the data is processed from a LDBs. So if you are using logical databases, it actually loops. When you're selecting the data from LDBs, it loops through the code. So if you write your code to, for example, I don't know if you will understand it, but still let me try showing you. If you don't understand it, ignore it. I'm using one logical database. Here I have different tables. They're logically, what do you say, attached, linked, yes. Now there is a table called LFA1, vendor master, then LFB1. No, there are different tables. So if you want to process data from these tables, you can write individual select statements to each table and get the data, right? By using these logical databases, I can use certain events. For example, tables LFA1, LFB1. Okay. Then let's say I'll use this event. I'll use all these reporting events just to demonstrate initialization. Or should I do at the beginning? Data v underscore time type UCEIT. So in initialization, I want to capture the time. So UCEIT. And then there's one more event called get. These is also a reporting event basically. So startup selection, initialization, startup selection, get table, end of selection. These are your 4 reporting events. Now I can say startup selection and then say I'll write one select single star from, or I can say select star from LFA1 into V into, or I can say LFA1, or since I'm using tables, it understands implicitly, or let's say specify LFA1 where LFINR, that's the vendor number, equals to something, and then I'll say end of selection. This is one way of selecting the data, right? And the same way, if you want to select from LFB1, you'll write one more select to select the data from LFB1. And then at the end, you can say write something. Or if you're selecting into internal table, then once the selection is over, you can say loop the internal table and write the output, whatever you want to do. The other way of doing it is, if you're using LDBs, I can use this get event. I can say get LFB1. And let's say I want to write some code. What code can I write here? So this will basically get the data into your program. I'll simply say I'm just writing some code to show you that it executes some code. And okay, now if I have this code this way, when I execute the program, first it executes initialization. I got this selection screen automatically because I'm using LDB. Let me give one vendor number. So let's say 1 to 2. So I'm giving these vendor numbers and execute. This get event automatically gets the data. So if you see LFA1, I got data from LFA1 and I got data from LFB1. Okay. I didn't write any select statements. So this get event will get the data from this LDBs automatically and fills my structures. So I don't need to write 2 select statements here. Simply one get event is getting me all the data. Now for the first vendor, it gets the data, then it executes all the code under this get event, and then it loops. Again it went to the get event. Now here it will get the second vendor details. So if I give 10 vendors, then it will loop between this get event 10 times. To get in every loop, it will get me one record about that vendor, right? So in this case, if I want to write my output, I want to first get the data and then I want to write it in the output, right? So if I use the write statement to print the output, even this write statement will get executed when this get event is triggered, right? But ideally, I want to get the data under this get event, but I want to print the output separately later. I don't want to print it in the loop. then how do you do that? In that case, you have to say end of selection so that you can separate your code. So you're saying end of selection. So this loops through this get event. In every loop, it will process one record. Once everything is over, once the processing is over, then you say end of selection and write your code to print output or do whatever you want to do at the end. So if you're using this get event, it makes sense to use end of selection. Otherwise, you don't need to use end of selection. Just because this is looping. Right? If I'm using start of selection to select the data, then I can use the write statement at the end. I don't need to say end of selection and then write the output.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
We will
sorry?
we will study the logical databases also in our
Yes,
syllabus.
I'll show you how to use a logical database in your program. So this end of selection is a reporting event, and we use that if you are using logical databases. Otherwise, you don't need to use end of selection. Or one other purpose of this end of selection is in start of selection, you write your code to select the data, and in end of selection, you say you print the output. For example, you have this code. Now, I'll say this is a report. When I execute this report, it's showing me some output. And I say, while you're printing the output, please change the column heading in the output. For that, you need to make some changes to the program. So where do you make those changes? Where will you make those changes? Since they are maintaining these events, I need to make these changes to the output. So the code responsible for printing the output should be somewhere under end of selection. So in the program, I'll see where they have maintained end of selection and simply concentrate on looking at this code, which should be changed. All I need to look at is this part of code. I don't even need to know other code in the program, because ideally the output is handled in end of selection. If I want to change, if they say, okay, change the selection logic, select some extra data, then I look at start of selection. So I look under start of selection to see what I should change, because under start of selection we maintain this selection logic. Right? So if you're using logical database, you have to use end of selection to mark the end of selection and print the output. Even if you're not using logical databases, if you use end of selection, it makes easier for others to scan your code to understand what they need to do where. So if they want to change something related to the output in your program, they can simply go to end of selection and then look at that code and modify it accordingly. They don't need to go through the whole code of your program. Okay, so that's one more advantage of using this end of selection.
Okay.
So at least you understand what are these events, what is the purpose, and what advantages you get by using these events. So by using these events, I have more control. I can provide more functionality to the user, because I can actually decide which part of my code should be triggered when. Instead of leaving it for the system to execute from beginning to end, I can actually divide my code in such a way that some part gets executed before showing the selection screen, some gets executed after showing the selection screen. Right? So, but as I said, there are quite a few events, and we'll see those events in detail later. Ravi?
Yeah, hi Kiran.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it's start of selection. If I have 3 start of selection, is there any way to do the start of selection sequentially, changing the order, or it may be only occurred as per the we have put the business logic, like if we put the 3 start of selection 1, 2, 3.
Generally, you won't.
So can we change the sequence of the start of selection? Like my third start of selection should execute at first. Even I put the start of selection at the third level.
Generally, we won't do it. You'll have only one start of selection, because it doesn't make sense. You're having multiple start of selection. But for the system, it looks all the code will be under startup selection. So when startup selection event is triggered, it will execute all your code. So whichever startup selection is maintained first, it will start with that and execute the remaining startup selections in that order. So if you want to do something under startup selection, you just need to use it once. You don't need to say startup selection 3 times because it doesn't make sense.
So in a one program, we can only mention the startup selection at one time only.
You can mention 2 times also, it won't give any syntax error. But
Okay.
the system, when it executes all of them together. For example, if I say startup selection here, few events you cannot use them more than once, it gives an error. Few events it won't give an error. Now it executes this startup selection first, and then it executes the second startup selection. So for the system, it's as good as one startup selection. So it doesn't make sense you maintaining. Instead of having 2 startup selections, you can rather keep your code. Simply keep this code under this startup selection. Okay.
So we need to best practice it to only mention in a one
Not
business
best
logic only
practice.
once and
Not best practice, but we don't maintain multiple events. Only one event you maintain, and whatever you want to do when that event is triggered, you maintain the code in that event. So you don't maintain 2, 3 events of the same. You don't repeat your events. Because one thing, the system will anyway execute them. For example, if I have 2 initialization events, for example, if I have initialization, here I say pmatnar equals to 200, and I have one more initialization event here, and here I'll say pmatnar equals to 300. So it's as good as writing under one initialization pmatnar equals 200 and then pmatnar equals to 300. Now if you execute, even this initialization is triggered before showing the selection screen. There's a first event that gets triggered actually. So it's executing this pmatnar is 200, then it goes and executes the next initialization. So for the system, this code is part of initialization. So everything gets executed when initialization is triggered. But when you do it this way, if you have developed this program and if you have to maintain your program later, I'll see that you have initialization here. So I'll simply change it here. If I want to change something at the beginning of the program execution, I'll change it here and I'll assume that this should change. But since you have maintained one more initialization here, after this this is getting executed. So the value is again getting changed. I want to change it to 400, but it's getting changed to 300 just because you maintain. So you're confusing me basically by maintaining more than once. So then I have to go through all your code to understand where else you have maintained initialization. Since that is not solving any purpose, you're unnecessarily confusing the other developers by doing it this way. So this is not the right way to do it. So don't use the same event twice. If you want to write some code, use the event once and write all the code under that event.
okay, fine. Thanks.
Okay, so that's about your events. Any questions, anyone, about these events? So for the time being, I'll stick to this at selection screen event. We'll be processing something related to selection screen. Anything that you do with the selection screen, you can use this at selection screen event. That's a selection screen event. And to divide our code so that we write our selection logic in the program, and we don't want that to be executed when at selection screen is triggered. So I'll use this startup selection event. So I'll create a new program again to discuss these messages. Let's say I'll say add selection screen, and then here I'll say select single MAKTX from MAKT into V underscore MAKTX, where matnar equals to P matnar. Then let's say start of selection or end of selection. Let's say I'll write this. So when the user gives me a material number, before I proceed with my selection, we always validate the inputs. So we'll validate whether the user has given a correct material number. If it is valid, then we'll proceed with our actual selection logic. Otherwise, we'll simply throw an error message and ask the user to correct his input. So how do we show these messages? How do I identify if the material number that the user has given me is valid or not? If the select statement is successful, then that means it's a valid material. If the select statement fails, then it's an invalid material. It's not maintained in the database. So how do I identify whether the select was successful or not? Anyone? Lakshmi?
Yeah, we check for size sub RC value.
Okay. So here if I say if size sub RC is initial, that means select is successful. If I say is not initial, the select failed, right?
Yeah.
So within this, you can show messages. Now what is the syntax to show message? The syntax is message, type your message, please input a valid material, and there's a type, then say the type of message. There are different types of messages that you can show. You can show informative messages, warning messages, error messages, short dumps, abandoned message, status message. So these are the different types of messages that you can show. Typically, we will be showing either a status message, a warning message, informative message, or error message. These are the messages we'll be using ideally. So anytime you encounter a situation in your program where you cannot proceed further with your program execution unless that error is corrected. So you cannot proceed further. In this case, if the user gives you an invalid material, you cannot proceed further in the program unless he gives you a valid material, right? So in such situations, you can show error message. So to show an error message, say type, and in uppercase, give E for error. Okay. So this will show me for example, if I give 100 or 200 as the material number and execute, it is showing me this message. Whatever message I maintain, please input a valid material. So these error messages are shown as red cross mark in the status bar, and you cannot proceed. The program execution will stop. You cannot proceed further unless the user corrects the error. Okay. Now the reason I'm using these events is, let's see how the system behaves if I'm not using these events. Now I'm showing the error message and I'm doing it under start of selection. I have not maintained any event, so the system by default keeps this code under start of selection. So all this code is now part of start of selection. So if I show this error message under start of selection instead of at selection screen, it shows me that error and it's taking me to some other screen. There's no way I can correct the error. The only way I can correct that error is to run the program again, right? Whereas if I use this at selection screen, it is throwing the error and it is staying at the selection screen and it is allowing the user to correct his error. So it is staying, it's showing the message, staying on the selection screen where I can correct the error. So that's the reason I'm using this event. So all the selection screen validations, we'll handle that under at selection screen event. So I can correct it and my program execution continues. So if I keep a breakpoint on this statement and I'll keep it on this statement. So I'm showing the error message, and when I hit enter, it's going to enter selection screen again, and it will not go to startup selection or any other event unless you correct this error. Okay, so error messages are shown as red cross mark in the status bar. Anytime you cannot proceed further unless the error is corrected, in such situations you throw an error message. So even while you're doing something in SAP, and if the system is throwing you an error message, then you need to correct that error before you can proceed. Okay. Now, if you want to show a warning message, say type W, this will show a warning message. Warning messages are used where you want to simply warn the user. It's not an error. You can still continue with your program execution, but you want to simply warn the user that something is missing. But that will not stop me from proceeding further with the program execution. So in such situations, you can throw a warning message. Okay. So warning messages are shown in the status bar with an yellow exclamatory mark. But when I hit enter, the program execution continues. Whereas with error message, the program execution will not continue unless the error is corrected. But with warning message, it simply shows the warning message, and when you hit enter, the program execution continues. Okay, it's executing the remaining code of my program. So warning messages you can ignore. If the warning is not too relevant to your situation, you can ignore it because it won't stop the program execution. So for example, if you're creating a data element in the system and you miss something, and if it is giving you a warning message, you can ignore it and proceed creating your data element. But if it is giving you an error message, then you cannot proceed. Right? So warning messages are shown as yellow exclamatory mark in the status bar, and the program execution continues after showing the message once you hit enter. Same way, informative message, type I. These are used to inform the user. For example, the user is asking you to update something in the database. Then once you update, you can show an informative message saying that update successful. Any informative message that you want to show, you can use type I. Informative messages are shown in a pop-up window like this. And when I click OK, the program execution continues. So it went to startup selection. Okay. And the status messages, type S. Status messages are shown right now. The message that you see at the bottom here, program saved, these are your status messages. They are shown on the next screen. So it's object activated is a status message. So if you want to show a message like this, you can use type S. When I execute, it shows the status message as a green check mark on the next screen. Okay, so if you want to show a message like this, you can use type S. Then we have X, type X. If you want to generate a short dump, we get when you're doing something, you might have come across some short dumps, runtime errors, right? So if you want to show something like that, a runtime error, short dump, you can raise it by using type X as the message. So type X message will generate a short dump. Okay. These are different types of messages that you can show. And we also have abandon. It's like error message, but abandon message, what it will do is, if you're trying to update something in the database, halfway through your application you have you have some data to be updated, then later you encounter one problem, so you don't want to update the data anymore in the database. So if you use an abandoned message, it will roll back that update. Whereas with error message, it won't roll back anything, it will simply stop executing your program further. But with abandoned message, it will also roll back if you have done any database updates. Prashant?
Hi, Kiran. With type S, why did it leave the selection screen and went to the next screen?
The message, type S messages are shown on the next screen always, if you have a next screen. If you don't have a next screen, then it will be shown on the same screen.
Okay, so even if it is under the X selection screen, it will be shown in the next screen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
For example, if I keep a breakpoint here, that's the reason I removed the breakpoints. Type S message, it is showing me on this screen. So whichever is your next screen, on that screen it will show. So on that final screen there is no message. Okay, so these are the different types of messages that you can show to the user. Any questions on this? Messages? So in your VBRP assignment, building document assignment, I said I wanted 2 checkboxes, one for pieces, one for boxes. So if the user selects both of them or selects none of them, validate and show a message saying that please select one of the checkboxes. Right? So now you know how to show messages in your program. So add that functionality to your program. Now, there's one problem with maintaining a message this way. One is using these literals is not recommended because simply you cannot reuse them. Let's say at a later stage in my program, I want to show the same message. For example, if size abar C is not initial, else if I'm just giving a vague example. Let's say I want to repeat my message somewhere else, not here, but somewhere else. Then I have to retype that message again. I cannot reuse my messages, right? So if you want me to use it somewhere else, so I'll write one more select somewhere else, and at that time also for this message it doesn't make sense, but generally there could be some messages which you want to repeat. So at different places you want to show the similar message. So in that case, if you are hard coding the message in your program, you cannot reuse it. If you want to repeat the message, then you have to again maintain that message in your program. You need to type message and type that text, right? So if you are using literals. And one more disadvantage of using this showing messages this way is SAP supports different logon languages, right? So SAP supports different logon languages, so you can log into different languages. Now I'm logged into German language, so everything I see is in German, even the menu options, everything is in German language, right? So a worker or user from Germany will prefer logging into this SAP system in German language. So here also if you see all the menu options, everything is in German language, all these options. So when you run your program and if you're showing these messages, ideally, you should show the messages also in the logon language of the user. But right now, it's showing me in English only. The user is executing my program in German language, but I'm still showing my message in English language because I have hard-coded this message in my program. So anything, whatever I maintain here, that will be shown. I'm not considering the language of the user to show the message, right? So to get rid of these problems, one is to reuse your messages. The second one is to show messages specific to the logon language of the user. Instead of maintaining it here, I can use text elements. I can say, for example, text 001, text hyphen, the number, 3-digit number. You can double click on this, or you can simply click on go to text elements, text symbols, and there you can maintain your messages, whichever way you can do. So I can double click, it's asking me to create, say yes. So here I can maintain my message. So instead of hard coding it in my program, I have maintained my message in that text symbol and I'm calling that here. So if I want to reuse this message, then I can simply say message text 001 somewhere else in my program. So I can reuse my messages now. So whenever I want the same message, I can simply call that text symbol there. So this gives me the reusability option. So let's see what happens if I run in German language. Let me change it to error message. It's not showing me any message. Right? When I maintain this text symbol, in German language it's not showing me any message. So you can maintain translations for this message. For example, generally when you develop these programs, the functional consultant will give you all the text, the translated text. We won't be translating them like this, but let's translate it. So you can click on this go to translation and give the target language German, and here you can maintain the translation. Save it. Even the program title I can maintain the translation. Now if I execute this report in English language, when I'm logged into English, it shows me the message in English, and when I run this while I'm logged into German language, it shows me the message in German language. It just picks up the translation. The system will not translate automatically. You need to manually maintain the translations. If you maintain translation, it automatically picks that translated text. So you can make your messages language specific. Since SAP supports different languages, different Logon languages, when you develop a program, and if your program is being used by different people from Germany, people from China, Japan, then you need to maintain the translations for every message in those languages so that you show the messages in that language to the user. So we use this text symbols instead of hard coding the message in your program. Any questions? Ravi?
Yeah, hi Kiran. Sorry, my connection has been lost. Can you tell me how to do the text thing again in a short?
Simply maintain text hyphen some number. You can have from 000 to 999, 3-digit number. Double click on this or click on go to text symbols and translation on from your report. So maintain the text here. And if you want to maintain a translation for this text, click on go to translation. Give the target language. Click OK and maintain the translations. Click save. Okay, if you click on go to text elements, text symbols, this is where it will take you. So here you can maintain. So let's say 002 material is valid. So this is the second message I'm maintaining. Activate it. So here I can say if size Abbas is not initial, show this message. else show message. You don't need to do it, but 002 type I. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So if I give a valid material, now it shows me that informative message. Vijita? Vijita, you have a question?
I'm sorry, I was on mute somehow. So when we, like we're maintaining translations for text elements, we can also maintain for selection text and other
Yes.
elements also, yeah.
Title,
And so
program title.
yeah, so my question is now, you mentioned that the number could be up till 999.
Mhm.
So this is only for text elements, right?
Yeah.
For other things, it directly picks up the text.
For other things means? What other things?
Like I have a selection text,
Mhm.
right? So
Here you can
when
maintain selection text elements, selection text. So
yeah,
here, based on the fields, you maintain those texts.
yeah,
Here you're
it
not
comes
giving
on,
any number.
yeah.
So
So
whatever
maximum number is 999.
for text
Yeah.
symbols, it's a 3-digit number you can have.
Okay.
Okay. And these are program specific, so I cannot use these text elements of this program in another program. These are program specific. I can use them only within this program.
Oh, that's the reason I was asking. Okay.
Yeah. So
Alright.
these are limited to your program. Whatever text symbols that you maintain are specific to this program. If you create a new program, then you can create text elements for that program.
Okay.
For example, in this program, if you want to have a text, then I'll go to text symbols and maintain the text for here. So again, you have 1000 texts that you can maintain. So these are specific to
We
this
also
program.
see text elements option in one of the screens where we create the program. It takes us to the same screen.
Where?
Text elements. SC38 is there. Maybe
Which one?
the text elements.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the same screen. Text symbols. Each
Right.
selection text symbol, everything is the same screen. Different tabs. Here you can maintain selection text. Here list headings and here text symbols.
I saw this screen which was triggered from somewhere else also. That's why maybe I'll figure out it later and I'm gonna ask you when I find it.
Okay. So these text symbols are program specific. You can reuse these text elements or text symbols within your program. So I can reuse this text -001 within my program. But if I want the same message in another program, let's say you're developing 10 reports or 10 different programs for one project, and in all those projects you are showing similar set of messages. Then if you are maintaining text symbols, you have to maintain those messages in every program that you are developing, because you cannot reuse these messages in another program. They are program specific. So if you are developing 10 programs for a project and you want to show similar messages in all the programs, then you can create something called a message class and show the messages from the message class. Okay. So here, if you go to SC91 transaction, here you can create a message class. July. Give some message class name. Since it's a global object, start it with Z. Click on create. Give some short text. Go to this messages tab. And here you can maintain your message. Again, you can maintain up to 1000 messages here. So I'm maintaining my message here. if you want to maintain translation, you can maintain translation the same way how we did for text elements. Then save it. This is my message class, and 000 is the message number in which I maintain the message. So if I want to use the messages from the message class, the syntax is a bit different. You say message, E for error, W for warning, I for informative. So specify what type of message, and the number E000. So it will pick up 000 message, and it will show it as an error message because I said E, and in brackets you can specify the message class name. So it will pick up this 000 message from this message class, and it will show this message as error message. So this is how you show a message from a message class. Here if I say text 002 type I, it will pick up this message from my text symbols. Here it will pick up the message from my message class. Okay, so this way you can reuse your messages in different programs. And if you are showing your messages, all the messages from the same message class, then you can, at the report statement level, you can say message ID and give the message class name. And if you simply say E000, the system will automatically pick up from the message class, from this message class. You don't need to specify the message class in the brackets. Vijita?
So Kiran, this message class is a class like we create in object-oriented languages, like
No. Don't get confused with the class. It's just a central store to store all your messages, to reuse them in multiple programs. For example, if you do a types declaration within one program, you can refer only the data objects of that program to your data type, right? That's a local data type. But if you create a data element in SE11, then that's a global data type. The same way, if you maintain text elements, text symbols in your program, they are local to this program. But the same thing, same messages, if you maintain in a message class, they are global.
Okay.
So you can call them from any program, basically.
Okay.
Ravi?
Yeah, hi Kiran. If the message numbers, as you mentioned that it's only limited to 1000 per class, so can we put the different more classes and include in the message ID equals to so and so in our
Message ID, you give the major class that you want to use. So if I don't specify the message class, the system will take the messages from this class. But if you specify a message class, it will take from that message class. So if I create one more message class, let's say MSG1, and if I give that, then it will pick up this message from this message class.
we cannot mention about the reports.
Here you can only give
message,
one
comma.
message. No.
We can only give only one class.
Yes. But that's more than sufficient. 1000 messages are more than sufficient. So.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
So any questions on this? Different ways to show messages. So it is all, we generally use message classes only. Even if you are using in one program, we prefer creating message classes, and never use message classes from some other programs. For example, if somebody has created a message class for his messages for his project, then you see that there are few messages in that message class which the same messages that you want, then don't simply use them in your program. If you want, you create your own message class, because tomorrow for that project, for that program, the user asks to show a different message, and if they change the message, then even it will change in your program. So don't use these message classes, don't reuse them unless they are created for your project. Okay, just because they have similar messages, don't just use them. If you want, create your own message class and use that, so that when you want to change the message text, you can change it without affecting the other programs. Otherwise, if everyone is using the same message class, then the moment you change it for one program, all the programs which are using the same message class will be affected. So we never reuse them. Ravi, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Is there any predefined classes, message classes where we can use the SAP message class where it's predefined and we cannot change that message? Like many times some message are we cannot we require frequently, and it's
Create,
like
that's what I just said, that never even think of reusing existing message classes. Use your own, because those messages classes were created for the programs that developer has developed. So tomorrow if any change is required for those programs, he'll simply go and change in his message class. So even it
yeah,
does, when he's doing
that one is by developed by the developer. I'm asking if predefined like SAP or
even if predefined SAP has developed, tomorrow in the next upgrade, SAP will choose to change their messages. So they'll change that message class only, right? So when you upgrade,
okay,
all the messages will be changed.
that time we are facing a problem.
So why do you
Yeah,
want to use
thank you.
message classes? That's what I just said. Don't reuse them. Don't even think of reusing them. Create your own message class. It won't take much time to create one. So create your own message class and use it. So shall I give you a couple of assignments on these messages? I'll give you 2 assignments. One is, right now, I'm showing this message, please input a valid material. Okay. I want you to show a message something like, the material number 100 is invalid. If I give 100 and execute, show me that value in the message. I want you to show me a dynamic message. So if I give 100 and execute, if it's an invalid material, the message should read, the material number 100 is invalid. If I give 200, then you should say the material number 200 is invalid. So whatever value I input in this field, you need to show that value in your message. So make your message more dynamic. Okay, something like here, if you see the message, it says user, my username is currently editing the program name, whatever program is being logged, right? So it's showing that values in the message, a dynamic message. So I want you to show me a similar message. So when I execute this program, include the value in your message, say, please input a valid material. Instead of that, you say the material number 100 is invalid. Same way, when we show this message, I can actually double click on the message to see more information about this message. So here they are giving me more information about this message, because there is a limitation on how many characters you can show in this status bar. So if you want to show more information, then the user can double click on your message and it will show me this window where I can maintain more information about my message. Same way, when you show this message, when I double click, you show me more information. So here you say the material number 100 is invalid, and here you write one paragraph of information saying the valid materials are available in MARA table, so please specify any of those materials, or use F4 help to select a valid material. So just write one paragraph of information suggesting me what I should do when I encounter this error. Okay, so figure out how you can do these 2 things. A bit of observation and F1 documentation should help you to complete these 2 assignments. Messages. Any questions? Vijita?
Kiran, can you check my program? I made the changes yesterday because I was doing lots of mistakes with the loops. I'll try it this time.
What's your program name?
Z_Vijita.
This one, same, 26th July?
30th July. 30.
VBRP 60A KNA1. Okay. Billing document at new you are using. Okay. So without using at new, what I was expecting was you would compare the previous value with the current value. So that logic I was expecting. Then now since you know, so you can actually keep this read statement also, because you want to read this header only when the document changes, right? So why do you want to execute that unnecessarily in every loop?
Okay.
This way you execute it only when you need it. Otherwise, every time in the loop you are executing that read statement. So you can keep this read here. Anything else you can keep inside this etnew block, you can do that. But since you are using etnew VBLN, this VBLN will be available for you to use it. Even the
Okay.
KNA one, you don't need it here. You can keep it here, right? So T06A you need it because you are printing the item details. Right? Looks good.
Okay.
So you can add those messages so that you can validate your selection screen. If I select both or if I don't select any of them. Can you tell me the document number? 900413000? What was it? 4.
I don't remember.
$400 to 404.
Yes.
Okay. So you're converting it into boxes.
Yeah.
Looks good. So just add that error message validation.
Okay.
Great. So now you're comfortable with coding? Data
Yeah,
selection.
kind of getting comfortable. Maybe a couple of more assignments will make me more
Okay.
comfortable.
So if you want to work on an assignment, there's one assignment for you waiting. Have you checked the projects in the forum?
Not yet.
So here I'm actually telling you which table you need to compare, which field and all these things. But this one assignment, you can try this out. Now you know internal tables. So you can analyze these tables and try it out yourself. Figure out how to do it. So try this assignment. Without looking at the programs people have already developed. I said create an ALV report, but forget about it. You can show me that list output.
Okay.
Just go through this requirement, analyze those tables and try to figure out.
Okay.
So anyone else has any questions? Keep working on these programs. That's very important. That's the only way you will feel comfortable. If you are dealing with this course more in theory, I think you have only 1 week. After that, you won't follow the classes. So try to work on the assignments. Fine then, I'm stopping the record.